What's up, Navigating Academia family? I hope you guys are having a wonderful week so far. As always, I appreciate the love, so take a moment to like this video and share it with your friends, with your colleagues, with your students. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts. And definitely, if you could do us a big favor, share a link to this or any of your favorite Navigating Academia videos on social media. It's obviously free for you to be able to do, and it helps us out a lot on the YouTube algorithm. Also helps us a lot if you comment below, even if you just say, loved it, or whatever you want, because clearly you're going to love this video. So you can just do it right now. What's the problem with that? So what I'm going to do today is to be able to answer a question from one of our very valued viewers. You guys know that I love you and that I support you every step of your journey in academia. And it's important for me to be able to give real-time feedback. Now, it used to be something where I offered free consultation sessions, but at the end of the day, the demand was ridiculous. And so it's such a blessing. At the same time, there's so many requests that I just can't field all of them. So because of that, if you have a question where you think that the question would be relevant to as many Navigating Academia viewers as possible, I will do my best to be able to make a video to try to answer it for you. Please do make sure, though, to be able to check out all of our videos and drop a like on as many of them as you can. Helps us out a lot to be able to see if we've already answered your question. But if I haven't already, I'll make sure to try to make you a video like this. So our question for today comes from Kavya. Basically, what the question is, I'll read it for you, but the basic question is, I have my dream doctoral program, and it's in a very specific field. And I also have publications, which is great, but the publications are not exactly in that field. So is that a problem? How should I talk about my publications? So on and so forth. And also, she says that she has a publication that's going to be coming up, which does have a good goodness of fit with her dream program, but she will not have submitted it, or will just have submitted it, won't be accepted yet, to a peer-reviewed journal by the time that she submits her application for her graduate program. So what do we do? Well, let's find out. First thing is we're going to read Kavya's question here, and then let's get into it. Here we go. Kavya says, I have two publications in international journals. One is first author and the other is second author. Good job, Kavya. However, these are in cognitive psychology journals. And then she gives the names of both of the journals. The good news is I recognize the names of both of the journals. There's nothing worse than there being a journal with a really fancy name, and then you Google it, and it's a journal that either has no impact factor, or it's a journal that's just very obviously a predatory journal where it's kind of pay to play. So there's this guy, right? And he's a librarian. His name is Beall. It's spelled B-E-A-L-L. Could be B-E-A-L-L-E, but I think it's B-E-A-L-L. And if you type in Beall's list into Google, you'll end up finding he's got this awesome website, and it gives you a list of like every predatory journal and every predatory publisher he's found. Highly recommend checking that out before you submit to any journals, especially if you ever get an email and the email is just like, hey, we want you to publish in our journal. We think that, you're the bee's knees, you're the ish, right? We think you're awesome. And because of that, we want you to publish with us. Never trust those people, right? Do your background research. The likelihood is very high that those are predatory journals. It's not a special issue or anything like that. There's no call for papers. They're just trying to get your money. And oftentimes, they're not going to tell you that they're charging you money until your piece has already been accepted. So don't fall for anything like that. Try to stay with impact factor journals because that suggests that they are legitimate, okay? So, and luckily, both of the ones that she mentions, I recognize. And that's a good sign. Why? Because I'm not in the field where those journals are in that field, but I still recognize them. And that's a good thing, because that means that people outside of the field may be aware of them in the first place, which is good news. So Kavya says, I also have counseling experience. My question is, how do I communicate to the supervisors for a Ph.D. in clinical psychology when my publications are clearly cognitive in nature? So Kavya, first and foremost, congratulations on getting the publications. That's really tough. And I remember the first time that I got my first publication, Kavya. And I remember I went out, I sat on like a lakeside with like a thing of champagne and all my buddies around and these sorts of things. We made a night of it. It was a really big deal. Now, like 90 publications later, I barely, crack open a bottle of wine, let alone champagne, when a publication comes out. Maybe I should go back to it, Kavya. Maybe you guys can convince me to go back to champagne days for Dr. Singh. But anyway, what happens is that both of the publications that you've got, number one, it's fantastic that you've got a first authorship position and a second authorship position, as opposed to this guy who had a 17th out of 18 author position on one of his publications that he had prior to applying to top clinical grad programs internationally. And again, remember, I got fully funded doctorate to my dream program, and so it ended up working out really, really well, which is great. So I don't want you to think that if you don't have a first authorship publication or a second authorship publication that you're screwed or anything. It's not true. But if you do have a situation like Kavya where you do have a first or second author piece, kudos, congratulations. It is genuinely awesome. So, yes, you're right. This stuff they're in cognitive journals. But honestly, Kavya, I don't want you to worry about it. As somebody who's a graduate supervisor and has been for, a hot second now, what I want you to remember is at the end of the day, all somebody like me is looking for, if you were applying to be my student, what I would be looking for is evidence in your CV, so in your resume, that you are committed to scholarship, that you have essentially taken a step into that pool. I don't expect you to have jumped into the deep end. Now, the good news is that you've already got evidence that you've done that, which is awesome, right? But the idea very much is you just need to show me evidence that you're interested in publishing. And if you've got a couple publications under your belt, you've already done that, which is awesome. You likely, especially if you've been first author, that suggests that you also know how to write well, because the perception of nothing else, the optics of it, is that you will have written the majority of that manuscript prior to publication if you're the first author. That's the assumption people are going to make. If you're the second author on a psych publication, then the likelihood is very high that you were what we call lovingly the gopher, and the gopher is the person who did like an absurd amount of work. But they're not the first author on the piece, meaning that they are not the individual who, at the end of the day, this was kind of their baby, and that's kind of the first author usually. And they're the ones who, if the article is bad, then it means that all of the doo-doo is going to go on their head, and if it's really good, then all the praise is going to fall on them first. That's the way that works. The way that I describe it to people is that, have you ever been to like for example, right? If I go to a conference and I publish something, one piece is a first author, one piece is a second author, you will hear people talk and say things like, hey, did you see that new Singh piece that came out? They're going to say that about my first author piece. They're never going to say, hey, did you see that new piece that Johnson, Fazell, Singh, and Braxton put out? No, they're never going to say that. They just know the pieces by who the first author was usually, right? So that's just the way that works, okay? So the fact that you're first author on the one, that's the one that people, if there is name recognition, it's most likely going to be on the article that you published as first author. At the end of the day, is this stuff cognitive? Yes. But because of that, what I want you to do is to really spend the time, Kavya, thinking about the story. Okay, that's what you have control over. You don't have control at this stage over where the stuff was published, okay? But what you do have control over is the story behind why you published that work in those journals. And what did you learn from it? Essentially, if I was a clinical psych Ph.D. supervisor, then what I would want to know is, okay, well, she's publishing things that are different than what I would normally expect and things that are not a good fit with the work that I do. But in her personal statement, because that's where you would talk about this, and also in your interview, be prepared to answer a question about something like this, okay? You're probably going to be asked about, well, we noticed that you seem to have a lot of interest. Seems like you got a lot of interest in cognitive psych. Why are you applying for a clinical psych PhD program? That's a fair game question, and be ready to answer it. And be ready to talk about your accomplishments in a way that frames it to be able to give you a strong position. So for example, you can say something like, hey, when I was doing that work, it was all in cognitive psychology, but then I ended up realizing that, hey, cognitive psychology, I was actually more interested in the psychopathological side of that, more interested in the abnormal processes that went along when those normal forms of cognition kind of go awry. That's where I got fascinated into. And that's how I found Professor such and such, your target supervisor, when I found Professor such and such's work. And that's one of the reasons why this is my dream program. This is where I want to be. And here are my ideas for the kinds of work that I would like to do here, which have a goodness of fit with that target supervisor. Ba-bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. There you go. Okay? That's the idea. You have control over the story. 50% of all of this is the story. You need the accomplishments, but then it's how you frame it. You could have done phenomenal things in your life, but if you don't frame it right, it's not going to come across well, right? You have to frame it in a way that ends up maximizing the likelihood that anyone that, especially your target supervisor, if they read your personal statement or if they interview you, that it's going to be something where they're like, this is a person after my own heart. This is someone who I don't have to train, 10 times as much as somebody who's not familiar with the field. They're already up to date. They know what they're doing, and they already have publications to be able to prove that they're interested in published scholarship, which is something that anybody, especially for a clinical psychology PhD and not a PsyD, Super important. So I think it's great. Second part of the question, Kavya, that you've got a third publication won't be submitted by the time. In your publication section, right front and center at the very top, before anything that's already published, I want you to put something in APA 7th edition, and in the print, and if you're watching this and it's not APA 7th anymore, then 8th, 9th, 10th, whatever, right? Where you would normally put the date in parentheses, I want you to either say in preparation, if you haven't submitted it, submitted, if you have submitted it, at the very end in italics, still put the name of the journal that you submitted it to, okay? Make sure it's a good journal, okay? And then finally, right, if you have submitted it though, right, you may also, and if you know it is actually under review, then you can say under review. You would basically say submitted if you've submitted and then you don't know what the heck is going on with it, right? But if it's something where you've actually gotten some kind of acknowledgement from the editor-in-chief or from one of the associate editors that it's actually being peer-reviewed, then you can say under review, which is great. Why? Because peer review tends to take place in kind of two different processes. People usually only think about formal peer review, but initially when the piece gets submitted, usually the editor-in-chief or one of the associate editors we'll take a look at it and decide whether or not it's a good fit in the first place or high quality enough in the first place, even to warrant peer review in the first place. So if it's already past that, hey, that suggests that the piece isn't garbage, which is a good thing, right? I have submitted pieces sometimes in the past when I was younger, and I submitted the piece and it got rejected from the, I remember this happened one time in particular, and I thought it was a great goodness of fit, and looking back now, it was a terrible goodness of fit. But you live and you learn. I've been publishing for, like 15 years, so it's one of these things where it's like you get used to it over time, Kavya. The good news is that you're way ahead of the game, ahead of most people, so really kudos to you. Congratulations. Keep us up to date on what happens. Please, please, please make sure that you let us know if you got into your dream program, which I know is in Canada. So my fingers are crossed for you. And in Europe, in Central Europe, we say die Daumen drücken. So I'm pressing my thumbs together for you, which is like I'm crossing my fingers. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching. If you got questions, make sure that you post them below. Be sure to like this video, share it on social media. Anything you can do to be able to help us out on the channel, guys. Even if you just want to spam the different links for navigating academia videos and like everything, please help me out. I appreciate it. All right, guys, lots of love. Talk to you soon. Peace.